Hey there, welcome to Matt's Garage. So today I got to dig through these boxes of parts here. In here somewhere is a new wheel bearing for my PT Cruiser. For today we're going to just be replacing the right front wheel bearing here. It's a press-in wheel bearing and I've got a Timken replacement unit. You'll notice I do have two replacement bearings here, and you always want to replace in pairs. I'll just be showing you the right hand side replacement today. But I do second bearing, and I will soon be replacing the left side as well. My PT Cruiser is a 2004, but this basic procedure will be the same for any PT Cruiser built. The first step's going to be to jack it up and pop the wheel off. And you'll need quite a few tools to do this. One thing you'll need for sure is a 32mm socket. And that's what you're going to use to remove the axle nut. You're also going to want a torque wrench that goes up to, I believe, 180 foot-pounds to retorque that nut. Electric impact's really nice to get things apart a little quicker. And then you're going to need an 18mm socket, a 15mm socket, 13, and a 10 for sure. And I'll just go through the tools as we go. One other thing you'll also need to do this job for sure is angle grinder. So I just got my 4.5-inch Makita there with the normal grinding wheel on it, and I'll get to why later. And I also have a hydraulic press. There are other methods of pressing these bearings in, but I believe this is the best. I'll just quickly go over the symptoms that you may experience if you have a bad wheel bearing. So what I was experiencing is just a loud, rough sound, kind of a bit choppy as the wheel was spinning. It wasn't like a smooth sound. It kind of sounded like, like a helicopter in the distance, that kind of a sound. And especially when you put on the brakes or go around corners, I could really feel it. Okay, so this is at about 40 miles per hour right now, 65 kilometers an hour. That seems to be a speed where it's really pronounced. You just hear that choppy sound. It's almost like a helicopter in the distance. Just listen to it as I let the car close down here through the speed. One other clue that your bearing's wearing out could be heat. So what you want to do is just feel after a long highway trip. Feel your center here. Be careful, your brakes might be hot anyways if you just stopped off the highway, so you don't want to burn your fingers. But just mainly feel around the center of the rim here, and then go over to the other side and go to the back and compare all four corners. And if you've got one corner that's way hotter than the other, then that's probably a problem. It is pretty typical for the front wheels to get a little hotter than the rear because your front brakes do more of the braking. So if you just slow down from a highway stop, expect your front wheels to be a little hotter than the rears. Now this particular one is so worn that I don't know if you can hear and see that. I'm probably jostling the camera too much, but there's actually significant play in it. I've got the car all jacked up now, and I'm just going to show you that play one more time. You can really hear it that way. You can hear it a little bit that way too. So what you want to check in that scenario is make sure that you're not feeling play that's actually in the tie rod, the lower ball joint, or in the strut. Make sure that it's actually the bearing. And one way to really confirm that is all those other things, the brakes attached to the spindle. So if there's play in anything back there, the brake's going to move too. But if there's actual play in the bearing, just the wheel's going to move, and that brake caliper there is going to be anchored to the spindle, so it's not moving. So what I like to do is put my finger in between the rim there and the caliper, and then I feel that play again, and I can actually feel the rim moving in and out on the brakes here, because as I said, the brakes are anchored in behind it where the bearing is independent of it. The standard size for the lug nuts on the PT Cruiser is 19 millimeter. If you have aftermarket lug nuts, it could be 21 millimeter. With these tin caps on these lug nuts, it's very important that you get your socket seated all the way on. If it's only partially on, it's going to damage the tin cap, and that's when you have the lug nuts that jam in the socket. I'm just going to show you a little trick. If you're working with these Chrysler lug nuts, you're bound to get one stuck in a socket eventually. And the way to get any nuts that's stuck in a socket out is with a hammer. You put the socket on the concrete or a metal surface, and you just go like that. You can already see that starting to move out of there. What happens when you're hitting it with the hammer, it just springs it, and the vibrations kind of bring it out there. There you go. You can see how easily that comes out. So while you've got the wheel off, it's a good time to thoroughly check your other components. I don't know if you can hear that, but there is a little bit of play in the outer tie rod end here as well. I'm just going to go around with some 3-in-1 oil and drip a little on all the exposed threads here, on the fasteners I have to take off. These nuts on the strut here are 21 millimeter. The nut on the tie rod end is 19 millimeter. The nut on the pinch bolt down here is 18 millimeter. The head of the pinch bolt is 15 millimeter. The caliper bracket bolt is 18 millimeter, I believe. And as I already said, it's 32 millimeter on the center nut here on the axle. Now there is a washer in here as well. Take that 19 off. That one's been replaced. Originally they have a nylock nut. This one actually has a castle nut with a cotter pin in it, so I'm going to have to get that out. So I'm just going to take the strut nuts off here, and they are splined in this side. We're just going to leave those bolts sticking in there for now until we get the rest of the fasteners off. So there is normally a bracket on the brake line back here where it attaches to the strut. You can see the little bracket here. And it doesn't have it on this one, so I'm thinking maybe somebody replaced something here at some point. That's okay, but I'm just letting you know you'll need a 10 millimeter to get that bracket off if your car is equipped. I'm just going to be removing the pinch bolt here, so as I said, 18 millimeter on the nut, and then I'm holding the bolt head with a 15 millimeter wrench. So once you get that pinch bolt out, I haven't completely removed it yet, but once I completely remove it, you'll see there's like a split in the cast there where it pinches together. So what you do is you take your pry bar and you stick it in that gap and you just spread it a little bit, and that will allow your spindle to lift up off of your ball joint stud there. So first I'm just going to get the caliper out of the way. I'm going to go ahead and grab I got one right here, a bungee cord. You can see there's such a ridge on this rotor here that the whole thing wants to come. I'm just going to get a pry bar here. Normally cars I maintain aren't like this, but I just recently bought this one. It's a higher mileage car, and I bought it purposely for this reason, so I could do some repair videos for you guys. So it is not in perfect condition, and that was the intent. Okay, so that's going to hang out back there. You can also use a zip tie, works pretty good. Just put it through a hole and then through the around the spring there. We can just pop this brake rotor off. So I am just working on this cotter pin here. There we go. And sometimes just that is enough to remove it. I'm just going to knock these bolts through here. If you just give them a good hard smack, it breaks the spline loose and they normally shoot out the back side. Just take the pressure off so that the other one will slide out too. That one was a little trickier. If it's really seized in, you may want to screw the nut back on a little ways before you wail on it. Now we just got to get that lower pinch bolt out. Everything's a little seized, but... And that one I am going to just put the nut on a little bit, as it's proving to be a little difficult. So don't just put it on one or two threads because that'll wreck the threads. Put it almost all the way on. There we go. There, we're going to clean that up really nice with a wire wheel while we have it off. If it's in rough shape, this is a bolt you want to replace because it's a very vital component. If this came out, your front end could fall apart completely. Just get a little pry bar now, and as I said, there's a slot in here in the cast, and that's where it pinches together. So you want to get your pry bar in there so you can get that axle right out of the way there. And you can see what I mean by that slot there, that you just put a pry bar in there and you work that apart. If you actually hold it, it does help to just spin it as you're working it off. There we go. I'll just spin that around and you can see that half moon there. That's what your pinch bolt holds in there. So now you just want to move that around and see what kind of condition it's in. I've actually got a replacement lower ball joint, but I'm not going to be putting it in just yet. This one's clearly been replaced, although it's pretty worn again, so I'm going to have to replace it again soon here. The axle, just rotate it like this and see how smooth it is or isn't. And to be honest, this one feels a little rough. And when you go like that, I don't know if you can hear that, but there's actually quite a bit of slop in that joint. It's not dry yet. You can hear some grease in there, but that axle is on its last legs. I'll be looking to replace that soon as well. So now this bearing, now that you have it off, you can hear that. Hear how dry and rough that is. The first thing we're going to do is push out that center hub. That pushes out, and once that's out, then you can get at this retainer ring. There's 3 13mm bolts on it, and once you have that off, then you can push the entire bearing out. Okay, so the number one thing that you need to know about working on a press is it is the most dangerous tool in your shop by far. So you want to be really careful. You want to have everything lined up perfect. If something is pushing on an angle, stop and reset it up. It will not work. It will put pressure on it and it will shoot out the side and possibly kill you. This is a 12-ton press, and you know, that's a heck of a lot of pressure, so you gotta use a little common sense in how you're applying that much pressure. So I've got this all lined up nice and straight here, and I've used sockets to level it up. One thing you'll notice that different sizes of sockets, even by the same brand, those are both Stanleys, and you can see they're different sizes, different heights rather. So that's how I level up the part. I've got a socket over here, and then it's sitting on the press plates over there, and then I have a socket that fits on the center. It's just pressing on the hub, and that's it. And when it pops loose, you'll hear a massive creak. So this part normally breaks loose pretty easy. It takes about 3 or 4 tons of pressure. And as long as you're pressing straight, it's okay to put quite a bit of pressure on it, but if, you know, things are really getting tight and nothing's happening, you just might want to have a look at it and make sure that you're doing everything right. Just hold on to your part as you're going, and that way if everything pops out, this doesn't fall and hit the floor because it's cast and you don't want that to happen. And then as this is coming through, you want to be ready to catch it. What's probably going to happen is the inner race is going to come with the hub, and then we'll have to grind and chisel that off. So that's something I'll show you here in a minute. Just want to get this out first. There we go. Oh, it looks like we got lucky. The inner race has come off with it, with the bearing, so the bearing came out complete. Normally what you end up with is the inner race stuck on there. So this is a little more typical of what happens when I bust these bearings apart. You can see the inner race is actually stuck on that one, and you can see all the balls there. So the other side wasn't like that. This is the passenger side that I'm doing now. I still haven't got the video edited, so as promised I'm doing both sides. So now what I'm going to do with this is wipe that off really good. The reason for that is I'm going to take some tape and just tape that area up. That area is the area where the outer race sits, so that's, you want to protect that, you don't want to gouge that up. And then this, we're going to grind this off. We're actually just going to grind a flat spot in just one side, and then it will crack and we'll be able to drive it off very easily with, there we go, you can see what I mean with that tape there. And I like to cap the end too, just to keep the grinding dust out. I'm just going to grind a flat spot on this bearing race here, and basically all the way through, and when I'm almost through you'll see a color change. You can see those discolored areas there where I've been grinding. So those are actually the spots where it's about ready to break through. You can see how thin it is from the top there. Now you can see I did nick the tape a little there, but barely. So I'll just make sure that there's nothing there. You can knock it down with emery if you end up leaving a bit of a burr. Well, I just went and got an array of chisels here because it helps once you get this loose. You still gotta pry it up. So for now I'm going to leave the tape on in case I slip with the chisel until I at least get a crack in there. Now you can just heat this area if you've got a torch like me. Don't get crazy with it, but you can get it a little warm and it might help it to expand a bit and possibly break. So I am going to grind a little more that way. Okay, you can see I got a nice flat area. So there's a little bit in the corner still, but I'm trying not to mess anything up. So I'll try to break it a little early, and then if I can't, I'll grind a bit more then. I'll try and just go straight down here first, because the top part here is about the weakest. Try and go down from this angle, get under the edge of the bearing. Looks like it's starting to crack there actually. You can just add a little bit of heat with a torch if you have one handy, and it'll just kind of swell it there. And then if you can get it sliding, there we go. You can see how that cracked right there. If you kind of just get under it and then hammer sideways under your chisel there a bit. Just put that chisel in that groove there. And there. And safely drive it right off. So there we go. I know the lighting's not the best, but You get an idea there. And then just to show you, there's no real damage. You can see I discarded a little when I got under it with the chisel there. But on the actual bearing surface here, there's no damage at all. I normally run a wire wheel over that really quick and wipe it down with some 3-in-1 before I press the new bearing on. So here is what we're left with here. You can see both races are still there. Normally this one pops out and stays on the hub, but I got lucky and it didn't. So now all I have to do is take these 3 13mm bolts out, and that'll pop that retainer off. You can see those have Loctite on them, and we'll be putting Loctite on them again when we reinstall them. There we go. With that off, the bearing is now free to come out the front side. You can see I have it set up with a larger socket now. This is actually 1 3/8, and it catches that larger part of the bearing nicely there. One little tip for you when you're adjusting your press, what you do is always have your press bed in the center on these bars, because it does have some movement, and that way you can use that to fine tune it by sliding the bed back and forth once you have this sort of where you want it. And you want to make sure that the plates aren't too far in, because they can actually catch the edge of the bearing, and then that would prevent the bearing from coming down. Now these bearings typically take about 6 to 7 tons to break loose, and they let go with a heck of a pop. And that was the bearing breaking loose, so you can see how much force that takes and how scary it is. My press is kind of a cheaper model and it bends around a bit doing this, so it makes me nervous. From here it presses down pretty easy. You can see the bearing moving down there right now. There we go. Sorry about the noise there. You can see that came out nice and clean. And we're just going to clean up this part a little bit, because you don't want any contaminants in the bore as you're pressing the new bearing in. Once I spray paint this, you won't be able to tell how much effort I put into it, but you can see I got that quite nice and shiny, and I especially cleaned up any areas directly adjacent to where the bearing is. A lot of people will tell you not to touch a bore or a bearing surface. I did run my wire wheel just really quickly in and out here just to take any loose stuff off. I mean, a wire wheel is not actually removing any solid material, just loose stuff, so I think that's perfectly fine. It's what I always do, and then I put a light film of oil in here before I press the new bearing in. Same thing here. I just ran the wheel over that really quick. You can see it's just cleaned it up. It hasn't altered the surface at all. Anyways, we're just going to be assembling this on the press. So what I've gone and done is blowing off the press really good with an air gun, because I do a lot of grinding and stuff in my shop, so I didn't want any of that metal grit to fall down into the new bearing when this thing creaks and shocks. I've got the bore lightly oiled with some 3-in-1. Just put a little 3-in-1 on a shop towel and wipe it around in there, clean out any debris, and leave a fine film of oil. I save old bearings for pressing in new bearings, so if I use the old bearing, it's only going to press on the outer race of the new bearing, especially since this inner race is missing from this bearing. So I just made sure to clean it up really good so no debris would fall into the new bearing. And there are numbers on both sides of this one, I guess. If there's only numbers on one side, I always put them down so that when you take the axle out, you can actually see the bearing number. On this, I guess it doesn't matter. You can put it either way. These bearings are reversible. You can see I've just used a nut to bring that side up because it was a little uneven. I've got it sitting on the caliper bracket mounts on this side, and they've got a bit of they're a bit thicker there. Now this bearing is going to go over, and then lastly, just this plate will go over. Okay, I'm just seeing it's a little off center, so we'll just back that off a little bit. That's why I leave my bed in the center, so that I can just make fine adjustments. And sometimes you have to bounce around a bit just to get it started straight. You just gotta watch it because this one's already trying to go a little crooked, but I don't know if that's showing, but that side's going down first, so I'm pretty sure I've got it straight. So what I'm gonna do is just temporarily move off center and get the bearing seated in there straight. Okay, you can see that straightened up now, and now I'm just going to go back to the center. It's going down nice and smoothly now. And you can see it's seated down there against the stop. So we're just going to put the lock ring on, and the one thing is make sure that you have the notch lined up here. You put that on like that, and then just make sure you put some Loctite on those bolts because you don't want those backing out. So just a quick dab of Loctite on each one, and torque them down to about I think it's around 25-30 foot-pounds is the spec on these. So as you tighten these down, what you want to do is just do it like you would tighten a wheel on a car. Just go you know, back and forth or around or whatever. Tighten them down equally, in other words. For Loctite, I normally use the Permatex Permanent Red. Seems to work good for me. I've never had anything come loose using it, and I'm still able to get things back apart that I've used it on. Well, okay, now we're going to put the hub into it. We've got the lock ring on there, and this time you're just going to set it on a socket. You want a socket that perfectly sits on that inner race. You'll notice that I'm using this 24mm socket just in the top of the hub here, and that just gives me a good place to push with the ram on the press. I have to hold this through the whole operation because it really doesn't balance well on this socket, but it's otherwise the perfect socket, and once I get pressure on it, it does work. Just want to be real careful that you've got that lined up on the bottom, because that's the important part. It'll press crooked and it will wreck the bearing if you're not lined up. Now did you hear the springs go twing? That means that it's bottomed out. You really don't have to press any more after that happens. When the metal contacts hard, it makes the springs do that. So now you just want to take this out and make sure that it spins smooth. See, no noise. It's a little stiff, but it doesn't have any hard spots. It's smooth and just consistently smooth. Okay, then we've got our rebuilt part there, and we're ready to start our install. So you just want to make sure that that notch is facing in, because it's a real task to get this on if it isn't. So that's going to be our first thing, is to drop that on. Put some 3-in-1 on there so it slides in there nice. You just spin it till it lines up. We'll put the 18mm nut back on, and you want to have the threads facing towards the back of the vehicle. That way if there's rocks and debris spitting up at it, it's not hitting on the threads. So now I normally use my impact gun a lot, but I will check it by hand as well just to confirm torque. The reason I was rattling that is because it's got to pinch that back together, and I was watching that happen. I'm just going to ensure that that is torqued well by torquing it by hand here. Okay, now we can shove the axle back in, which I cleaned off with some brake clean. And I have looked up the torque spec. You just have to spin that to line up the spline a little. And it's 180 foot-pounds anyway, so that's the torque spec on this center nut here. And these, you put the bottom one in first. And you want to hammer these home because they have a spline. So you hammer them until they sit flush, and then you can just push in, see, to line up the top one. It's real easy then. You gotta put a little downward force just to line up that first hole, and then you can just, easy as that. Second layer. Same thing, the threads come out the back side. That way if rocks whip them, they're not messing up the threads. And it's never bad to confirm by hand. Now that, one little trick with these, I just, I tap them in because they're on a taper. And if you tap them in and oil the nut up really good, you normally rattle on with an impact and tighten down. And just like I said, it caught on the taper before it started to spin. Okay, so we have to torque the center nut. The vehicle is in park and the other wheel's on the ground, so I could probably torque it up, but I don't like to put that kind of strain on the park pin and everything else. So what I'm going to do, 1/4 inch extension fits perfectly into the brake vents here. See that? It wedges on the caliper bracket and nothing can move now. Okay, full disclosure, this is only a 150 foot-pound torque wrench here. It's all I've got on hand, so I'm going to torque it to 140 actually. The spec is 180, and then I'm just going to guess at the last 40. So I'm not recommending this procedure, but it's what I'm doing, and I suspect it will work. Just whatever you do, make sure you get this center nut torqued and don't just rattle it down with an impact. So there is 140. So now I'm going to take this, which is, it's a welded up torque wrench, it's just like a breaker bar, and I'm going to give it another little bit here. So that's going to be perfect there. I'm calling that good. If anything, that's probably a little over. Now see, that comes out nice and easily. It doesn't get stuck in there. And we're just going to take a little brake clean. Clean up that rotor. Well, that's pretty well going to conclude this video here. All I've got left to do is put the wheel back on. I hope you found the video helpful. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more, and have yourself a great day.